then adjourned to ensure they do get to come back for the business of the day. Today, it's all about a budget presentation, a 2024 budget presentation, and talk about what the 2023 budget presentation looked like. It was all about the allocation of certain funds to various ministries, and like we have been talking to you earlier on, that the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education since 2021, 2022, and all the way to 2023 got so much, was the ministry that was allocated more money than any other ministries. For the obvious reasons, Zimbabweans are well known for being educated and ensuring that the education will continue, investment in terms of infrastructure, construction of schools, among other issues that the Ministry of Education will get to benefit. And apart from that, the Ministry of Health obviously got the second biggest allocation in the 2023 budget. It actually had 473 billion in the year 2023 to ensure that all matters are pertaining to health, be it buying of new equipment, ensuring that there is medication in all our hospitals. These are all issues which will fall under the Ministry of Health. That's why it got a second biggest allocation. And then there was the Ministry of Agriculture, and you know Zimbabwe is obviously an agro-based country, and the Ministry of Agriculture is key in terms of the economy.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I move that leave be granted to present a statement of the estimated revenues and expenditures of the Republic of Zimbabwe for the 2024 financial year and make provisions for matters ancillary and incidental to this purpose. This is in compliance with Section 103, subsection 1 of the Constitution, as read with Section 7, subsection 2A of the Public Finance Management General Regulations of 2019. As an introduction, Mr. Speaker, sir, this being the first budget following conclusion of the August 2023 harmonized elections, allow me to congratulate His Excellency the President, Dr. E.D. Mnangagwa, and all honorable members who were re-elected and those serving for the first time in this august House. I look forward to working closely with all of you as we implement the National Development Strategy 1, NDS 1, which seeks to achieve the country's vision of becoming an upper middle income society by year 2030. Let me take this opportunity to thank His Excellency the President, Dr. E.D. Mnangagwa, for his wise counsel and support during the formulation of this budget. Credit also goes to the two Vice President, Honorable General Retired Dr. C.G.D.N. Chiwenga and Honorable Colonel Retired K.C.D. Mohadi, as well as fellow cabinet ministers for their inputs and suggestions. The President's people-centered development philosophy, Nika, inovakwa igotongwa igonamatigwa nevene vayo ilizwe lakhiwa libuswe likhulekelwe ngabanikazi balo. This philosophy enjoins all levels of government and citizens to provide new impetus to the country's transformation agenda of enhancing production and productivity across all sectors of the economy in order to build a stronger economy and a fairer society where everyone can fulfill their dreams in dignity, peace, security, and leaving no one and no place behind. Mr. Speaker, sir, aligned to this thrust, the theme of the budget, this budget, is consolidating economic transformation. The proposals and suggestions from consultations with parliamentarians, the various ministries, we call them MDAs and departments, business, labor, academia, civil society, youth, women, small-scale enterprises, and miners, among others, largely informed the priorities outlined in this budget statement. Mr. Speaker, sir, before turning to specific interventions, allow me to put the 2024 national budget in the context of both the global and domestic economic environment. Let me begin with the global economic outlook. The global economy is expected to continue to recover, but unevenly, from the negative impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the cost of living crisis. The unprecedented tightening of global monetary conditions in response to decades-high inflation levels has slowed the pace of global economic recovery. Consequently, the International Monetary Fund and through its World Economic Outlook, they focus in October 2023 that global growth will slow down from 3.5% in 2022 to 3.3% this year, 2023, and then down to 2.9% in 2024. Mr. Speaker said there should be slides on the walls. I see there's a big slide indeed. I'm sure members could follow some of those figures there. Growth in the sub-Saharan Africa region is projected at 3.3% in 2023, and it will pick up to 4% in 2024, mainly driven by strong performance in non-resource intensive countries. The real GDP growth rate of the Southern African Development Community SADC is projected to decelerate to 1.6% in 2023 from 2.7% in 2022, before recovering to above 2.7% in 2024. A few words about global inflation, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, declining international commodity prices, monetary policy tightening have hampered headline inflation during 2023. In that regard, global headline inflation is projected to decelerate to 4.8% in 2024 on a year-on-year basis. This is from as high as 8.7% and 5.9% in 2022 and 2023, respectively. In terms of commodity prices, the outlook period, commodity prices are expected to remain broadly unchanged over the remainder of 2023 and into 2024, amid improved supply prospects and weakening global demand. There should be again a table showing the trend in commodity price indices. You can see they're basically flat to downwards, maybe except for gold, those of you who have been investing in gold of late. On the domestic economy, Mr. Speaker, sir, the domestic economy is now projected to grow at 5.5% in 2023, a slight upward revision from the August projection of 5.3%. This is on account of a better than expected output in agriculture, particularly tobacco, wheat, and cotton. However, economic growth is expected to slow down to 3.5% in 2024, mainly owing to the anticipated impact of the El Nino phenomenon being forecasted for the 2023-2024 summer cropping season on agricultural output, as well as declining mineral commodity prices attributable to the global economic slowdown. Mr. Speaker, sir, the 2024 GDP projections are underpinned by the following broad assumptions. One, normal to below normal rainfall season due to the El Nino effect. Two, a slowdown in global economic growth amid geopolitical tensions as well. Three, declining international commodity prices. Four, continued use of the current multi-currency regime. And five, tight fiscal and tight monetary policies. These slides 7 and 8, my notes here, it will show up there to basically show what's going on there in terms of these assumptions. Mr. Speaker, sir, let me turn to the balance of payments position. Mr. Speaker, sir, merchandise exports stood at 5.2 billion during the first 9 months of the year, and are projected to increase by 4.3% to 7.3 billion by year end. And this is compared to 7 billion in 2022. And this is on account of higher tobacco, lithium, and diamond exports. In 2024, despite the softening of commodity prices of key minerals such as gold and PGMs, exports are projected to remain on the increase, sustained by growth in output from lithium, coke, tobacco, and the increase will be to 7.7 billion US dollars. Let me now turn to imports. Merchandise imports registered a 4.7% increase. This is from 6 billion in the first 9 months of 2022 to 6.3 billion in some period in 2023. This was driven by growth in fuel, machinery, and electricity imports. To year end, merchandise imports are projected at 8.5 billion, which is a 4.9% growth, up from 8.1 billion recorded in 2022. Imports are projected to further increase to 9 billion US dollars in 2024 on account of higher imports of grain, of energy, raw materials, and machinery imports. Up there is a chart showing the growth in our imports, the trend going as far back as 2018, and we can see that steady growth. Only a growing economy can register that level of import growth trend. Remittances are projected to continue during the current account. Let me retake that. Remittances are projected to continue driving the current account surplus and are projected to close the year 2023 at 2.1 billion US dollars, before rising further to 2.2 billion US dollars in 2024. The current account is expected to close the year 2023 in a surplus position of 244.4 billion US dollars, so 244 million US dollars, slightly lower than the 305 million US dollars registered in 2022. In 2024, the current account surplus is projected to narrow somewhat to 204.5 million US dollars, reflecting a wider trade deficit as imports accelerate at a faster pace than exports. Let me turn to domestic inflation. Mr. Speaker said, domestic prices have relatively been stable since the third quarter of the year, as reflected by a month-on-month inflation level which declined from 12.1% in June 2023 down to 4.5% in November 2023. Concomitantly, the annual headline inflation declined from 30.9% in June 2023 to 21.6% in June 2023. In the outlook, annual inflation is expected to remain relatively stable and is projected to end the year 2023 slightly below 20%. In 2024, annual inflation is anticipated to end the year between 10 to 20%, reflecting continued tight monetary and fiscal policies. A statement about the exchange rate. Mr. Speaker said, the introduction of the wholesale foreign exchange auction on the back of the recent liberalization of the exchange rate saw the parallel market premium declining from a peak of over 140% in May 2023 to around 20% in October 2023. A few comments about monetary developments. Growth in both reserve money, as we call it M0 in economistic language, and broad money, M3, has significantly slowed down, having peaked in June 2023. The reserve money and broad money annual growth declined from about 3,000% and 1,100% in June 2023 to 1,400% and then 719% in September 2023, respectively. The decline in monetary aggregates was largely due to the combined effect of tight monetary policy and prudent fiscal policy measures. Mr. Speaker, sir, the financial sector has remained sound and stable, with strong capital and liquidity positions, as well as strong risk management practices. This is evidenced by sound financial indicators such as the capital adequacy and liquidity ratios and the level of non-performing loans. Let me turn to the public finance developments, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, sir, revenue collections for the period January to September 2023 amounted to 11.4 trillion Zimbabwe dollars against expenditures of 12.3 trillion Zimbabwe dollars, resulting in a budget deficit of 0.9 trillion Zimbabwe dollars. There should be a slide to show the numbers on the screen. To year end, revenue collections are projected at 21.2 trillion against projected expenditures of 22.6 trillion, comprising compensation of employees at about 10.9 trillion, the use of goods and services at 4.7 trillion, and then capital expenditure at 4 trillion. During the first 9 months, the fiscal deficit stood at 0.9 trillion and is projected to end the year at 1.4 trillion. This is 1.2% of GDP, which should be financed through domestic and external borrowing, and that's what we've been doing. A statement on public debt, Mr. Speaker, sir. The total public and publicly guaranteed debt stock at the end of September 2023 amounted to $17.7 billion, of which external debt amounted to $12.7 billion, and domestic debt is at $5 billion equivalent. Let me turn to the macroeconomic fiscal framework for 2024, which is basically driving our projection as well as revenue forecast, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, in line with the projected economic growth of 3.5%, total revenue collections in 2024 are estimated at 53.9 trillion Zimbabwe dollars, which is 18.3% of GDP. And this is an increase from the current ratio of about 17.8% of GDP. And this is broken down into 51.2 trillion in terms of tax revenue, and then 2.7 trillion in non-tax revenue. Guided by the expected revenue envelope and the desired fiscal path, expenditures in 2024 are projected at 58.2 trillion or 19.8% of GDP. The proposed expenditures take into account the following. One, the need to maintain the purchasing power of civil service salaries. Two, ensuring provision of core social services that benefit the poor. Three, sustaining maintenance and rehabilitation of government infrastructure. Four, prioritize support to ongoing public infrastructure projects. Five, non-accumulation of arrears. And finally, six, an increase in the funding of infrastructure projects through public-private partnerships, otherwise known as PPPs. The total budget financing gap amounts to 9.2 trillion Zimbabwe dollars, comprising a budget deficit of 4.3 trillion Zimbabwe dollars, or 1.5% of GDP, and amortization of loans and maturing government securities estimated at 4.9 trillion Zimbabwe dollars. The deficit will be financed through domestic and external borrowing. Mr. Speaker, sir, I now turn to the proposed vote allocations. Mr. Speaker, sir, during the formulation process of the 2024 national budget, the various ministries, departments, or MDAs submitted funding requirements, which we call BAIDs, of over 110 trillion Zimbabwe dollars. This is against the available envelope of only 58.2 trillion Zimbabwe dollars. The envelope is limited by the sustainable revenue to GDP ratio of about 18%, which has been allocated to the various ministries, the MDAs, and is indicated. There is a table on the screen, but I'll go through each vote in a minute, one by one. But maybe let me delve into the budget priorities and then delve into the vote allocations. Mr. Speaker, sir, the priority areas of the 2024 national budget have largely benefited from the NDS 1 midterm review, as well as input from various stakeholders. A key priority of this 2024 budget is on economic growth and macroeconomic stability. The fiscal policies thrust for the 2024 national budget is guided by the need to maintain a sustainable budget deficit within the SADC macroeconomic convergence threshold of not more than 3% of GDP. Going into 2024, government seeks to consolidate and entrench the stability to facilitate economic transformation and preserve disposable incomes. Fiscal restraint and tight monetary policy, together with a healthy current account position, provides the necessary conditions for currency and price stability. Specifically, the central bank, our Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe, will target a month-on-month inflation of less than 3% throughout 2024. Let me turn to civil service remuneration, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, as part of the remuneration review process for civil servants, government will convert the current COVID-19 and cushioning allowances, which aggregates to $300 a month. This will now be part of the pensionable emoluments across the board. And this is effective January 2024. Let me transition to the productive sectors and the ministries that support those sectors, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, starting with agriculture, the country has achieved national food security through its agriculture support model. Going forward into 2024, the thrust is on consolidating the gains achieved so far. In this regard, 4.3 trillion Zimbabwe dollars is being allocated to the Ministry of Lands, Agriculture, Fisheries, Water and Rural Development to spearhead the implementation of agriculture and food systems transformation strategy. A footnote, Mr. Speaker, sir, we are chasing the target of the Maputo target, which says that the budget for the agricultural sector should not be less than 10% of the total budget. And we have tried to really get there at 4.3 trillion Zimbabwe dollars allocation to the ministry. A few words about the manufacturing sector. Mr. Speaker, say in 2024, the sector is projected to grow by 1.6%, whilst capacity utilization is expected to average 60% on account of expected price and exchange rate stability, improvement in electricity supply, as well as increased usage of the local currency. There's a chart on the screen showing the capacity utilization currently at about 60% for the sector. To sustain the gains recorded so far in the manufacturing sector, an amount of 130.5 billion Zimbabwe dollars is being allocated to the Ministry of Industry and Commerce to support development and implementation of industrial policy and the retooling of the industry. Let me turn to the mining sector. Mr. Speaker, government will continue to support the mining sector to ensure sustainable growth of the sector, projected at 7.6% in 2024, driven by ongoing investment in the PGMs, group of metals, in gold, in coal, in lithium, among others. There's a chart showing the growth in that sector on the wall. In this regard, an amount of 132.7 billion Zimbabwe dollars is being proposed as an allocation to the Ministry of Mines and Mining Development to implement the legislative and administrative reforms that provides a conducive environment for mining and beneficiation. Let me turn to tourism. Mr. Speaker, the tourism industry is expected to continue on a growth path driven by domestic, regional, and international tourist arrivals. To support the operations of the Ministry of Tourism and Hospitality, an amount of 71.1 billion Zimbabwe dollars has been allocated to spearhead tourism development in the country, as well as marketing the country as a destination of choice. I now turn to climate issues. The government recognizes the importance of conserving our environment through combating the unsustainable exploitation of our natural resources, addressing climate change impacts, as well as wildlife conservation. Hence, an amount of 135.5 billion Zimbabwe dollars is being proposed as an allocation to the Ministry of Environment, Climate and Wildlife. Let me turn to the cluster of infrastructure, ICT, and the digital economy. Mr. Speaker, sir, one of our own in our profession, Larry Summers, who is a well-known economist, once said that expenditure on infrastructure is an investment in the long-term productivity and competitiveness of an economy. Therefore, outlays towards the sector seek to re-establish functional infrastructure services by improving the quantity, quality, and access in order to improve the country's investment climate, reduce the cost of doing business, as well as enable citizens to engage in socio-economic activities. The government will expand and modernize funding models that broaden the investor base in flexible and innovative ways, such as asset recycling and the use of public-private partnerships, PPPs. Overall support for infrastructure, including devolution during 2024, amounts to 10 trillion Zimbabwe dollars, comprising fiscal support of 8.1 trillion Zimbabwe dollars, complemented by statutory and other resources of 1.4 trillion, development partner support at 189.9 billion, as well as loans amounting to about 322.2 billion Zimbabwe dollars. A comment on transport, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, improvements in our transport systems remain critical given the need to enhance connectivity and access, including the promotion of regional and international trade. In this regard, 1.2 trillion Zimbabwe dollars has been allocated to the Ministry of Transport and Infrastructure Development to facilitate the rehabilitation and construction of transport infrastructure, such as roads, ports of entry, airports, as well as to facilitate the turnaround of the National Railways of Zimbabwe, NRZ. Coming to energy, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Energy and Power Development has been allocated 90.1 billion Zimbabwe dollars to facilitate investments in energy generation, enhancing the transmission and distribution network, as well as sustaining the rural electrification program. On the digital economy, consistent with our NDS-1 objective of attaining a digitally enabled economy, the budget will support interventions that harness and promote the use of ICT services across the whole spectrum of the economy. In this regard, an amount of 185.3 billion Zimbabwe dollars has been allocated to the Ministry of Information, Communication Technology, Postal Services, and Courier Services. Let me turn to housing, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, I recall the former IMF chief and the current president of the European Central Bank, Madame Christine Lagarde, saying that housing is not just a basic need. It is an essential component of a vibrant and inclusive economy. Government will work closely with the private sector and other stakeholders to put in place appropriate packages and incentives that allow for enhanced financing and implementation of targeted housing delivery projects. An amount of 353 billion Zimbabwe dollars has been allocated to the Ministry of National Housing and Social Amenities to facilitate construction of houses to the general public, civil servants, as well as institutional accommodation. Let me turn to water and sanitation. Mr. Speaker, the 2024 national budget has set aside 608.3 billion towards the following strategic priorities in the water and sanitation sector. The rehabilitation and maintenance of existing water and sanitation infrastructure. 2, the construction of additional water bodies targeting completion of ongoing dam projects. 3, capacitation of local authorities like NZINWA and other agencies involved in water resource management. And 4, improving access to water and sanitation services in the rural areas through drilling of boreholes and the construction and rehabilitation of water supply schemes. Turning to youth, sports, arts and culture, Mr. Speaker said an amount of 210.2 billion Zimbabwe dollars has been set aside for the Ministry of Youth Empowerment, Development and Vocational Training to support youth development and empowerment programs, refurbishment and retooling of vocational training centers, as well as combating of drug and substance abuse. In addition, the Ministry of Sport, Recreation, Arts and Culture has been allocated 136.2 billion Zimbabwe dollars to spearhead the development of the sports, recreation and cultural activities, including rehabilitation of major stadiums. I now turn to the aspect of women, gender equity, SMEs, and support for war veterans. Government is committed to empower the marginalized sections of society, including women and small to medium-scale enterprises, SMEs. Hence, 188.1 billion Zimbabwe dollars has been allocated to the Ministry of Women's Affairs, Community, Small and Medium Enterprises, Development, to implement empowerment initiatives, including the recapitalization of empowerment institutions such as Empower Bank, SMETCO, and Women's Development Fund. The 2024 national budget also allocates 221 billion to the Ministry of Veterans of the Liberation Struggle Affairs towards their monthly gratuities, medical benefits, funeral grants, school fees for their dependents, and then also to support a mop-up vetting exercise and the capacitation of provincial and district structures under the ministry. Let me turn to the issue of human capital development and well-being. Mr. Speaker, sir, interventions in core social services of education, health, as well as timely social protection for the vulnerable will ensure that every child has an opportunity to maximize its human potential, human capital potential and contribution to society. On health, Mr. Speaker said the 2024 national budget seeks to consolidate recovery of public health sector services across all levels of healthcare through provision of requisite tools of trade such as adequate working space, manpower, drugs, medical supplies across the value chain. In this regard, an amount of 6.3 trillion Zimbabwe dollars has been allocated towards the Ministry of Health and Child Care. And again here, a footnote, Mr. Speaker said, we're always chasing the Abuja target. In this regard, I think we've worked very hard on it. Let me turn to the education sector. Mr. Speaker said, again I'm going to quote an economist called Gary Becker. He was awarded the 1992 Nobel Prize in Economics for what it's worth. He says that expenditure on education and skills development is an investment in human capital, which is a key driver of economic progress and social mobility. Looking at the primary and secondary education, therefore the 2024 national budget prioritizes provision of quality and easy access to education and other learning opportunities for children, which is central to the attainment of SDG number 4. In this regard, 8 trillion Zimbabwe dollars has been set aside for the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education for learning and as well materials as well as teacher capacitation at primary and secondary education levels. These include resources for the procurement of sanitary wear for disadvantaged girls. Then on higher and tertiary education, Mr. Speaker, I propose to allocate 2.4 trillion to the Ministry of Higher and Tertiary Education, Innovation, Science and Technology Development to support implementation of Education 5.0, which promotes a knowledge-driven economy that is sustained by innovation, industrialization, and modernization. Mr. Speaker, a footnote, both these allocations for primary and secondary education and for higher and tertiary education, we add those up together, you'll find that they are way beyond the 20% target which has been set through the Dakar agreements, which says that no less than 20% of the budget in Africa should be allocated to this sector. Let me turn to the skills audit aspect. Mr. Speaker, an amount of 43 billion has been allocated to the Ministry of Skills Audit and Development for undertaking national skills audit that seeks to identify existing human capital gaps that need to be addressed. The audit will also attempt to identify the skills for the future, especially in areas such as generative artificial intelligence, AI, as well as areas of potential national comparative advantage. I now turn to social protection. In line with the NTS 1 theme of leaving no one and no place behind, provision of decent, inclusive and sustainable social protection services remains a priority for government, targeting vulnerable groups. This could be the disabled, children, the elderly, and so forth. In this regard, a budget of 2.4 trillion Zimbabwe dollars has been set aside for the Ministry of Public Service, Labor and Social Welfare to implement social protection programs such as the Basic Education Assistance Module, BEAM, Harmonized Cash Transfer Programs, as well as the Food Deficit Mitigation Program, Health Assistance, Child Protection Services to support the elderly and persons with disabilities. I now turn to effective institution building and governance, which is also a priority of this budget. Mr. Speaker, successful economic transformation hinges on effective institutions of governance, which promotes private sector development through a conducive economic environment. To facilitate legislative reforms, including the alignment of laws to the Constitution, the 2024 national budget has allocated 1.1 trillion Zimbabwe dollars to the Ministry of Justice, Legal and Parliamentary Affairs. In addition, the government will continue to capacitate and reform critical institutions of governance in order to improve the doing business environment. Let me turn to state-owned enterprises reform. Mr. Speaker, as part of the state enterprise reform agenda, the government is addressing the conflict of interest that arose from exercising both ownership and regulatory functions, which undermines progress on the implementation of critical reforms that are required to improve performance as well as achieve the national vision. The Mutapa Investment Fund, a sovereign wealth fund, was established to deal with this. The fund will therefore be expected to implement measures that will strengthen the targeted parastatals governance frameworks and ensure operational profitability of the state-owned enterprises. A word about national security, Mr. Speaker. The security forces play an important role of protecting the country's territorial integrity, national interest, and sovereignty over land and airspace against both internal and external aggression. Peace is key to economic development. Therefore, an amount of 8.6 trillion Zimbabwe dollars has been allocated towards the security cluster to meet their remuneration, food rations, operational equipment, and the necessary infrastructure for the Ministry of Defense, Home Affairs, Cultural Heritage, Prisons and Correctional Services, as well as Special Services. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the Tripartite Negotiating Forum. The Tripartite Negotiating Forum, TNF, is a statutory body established through the Tripartite Negotiating Forum Act of 2019. In this regard, resources have been set aside to meet employment, operations, and capital costs for an effective TNF secretariat. I now turn to oversight institutions. And the August House now should pay attention. Zimbabwe, as a constitutional democracy, values the importance of oversight institutions on the operations of the state and welfare of the general public. Turning to the Auditor General, to support the Office of the Auditor General's operational requirements, $117 billion has been provided for under this budget to cover employment costs, training and development of staff, digitization, as well as rehabilitation and upgrading of their office space. Now, turning to Parliament. Parliament plays an important role of legislation and oversight over the executive. Therefore, to support the functions of Parliament, $475.1 billion Zimbabwe dollars has been provided under the 2024 national budget for the day-to-day operations, for vehicles, for Constitutional Development Fund, CDF, and other related equipment for both Parliament staff and honourable members of Parliament. Turning to the Public Service Commission. The Public Service Commission is central to the effective and efficient delivery of public services through recruitment and development of civil service personnel. To support the Commission to deliver on its mandate of providing, I would retake that. To support the Commission to deliver on its mandate of providing a motivated and capable public service able to deliver quality public services, the budget has set aside 1.4 trillion Zimbabwe dollars to support interventions by the institution targeting ICT infrastructure, particularly the Human Resource Information Management System, pension system, payroll system, procurement of buses for the service, and other major infrastructure projects. I now turn to other independent commissions which also have been allocated budgets. Judicial Services Commission, JSC, allocated 274 billion Zimbabwe dollars. Human Rights Commission, $42.1 billion. National Peace and Reconciliation Commission, 56 billion. National Prosecuting Authority, 98.3 billion. Zimbabwe Anti-Corruption Commission, 59.6 billion. Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, 116.6 billion. Zimbabwe Gender Commission, 53 billion. Zimbabwe Gender Commission, 48.5 billion, correction. Zimbabwe Land Commission, 53 billion, and the Zimbabwe Media Commission, 35 billion. A comment on devolution and decentralization, Mr. Speaker, sir. The 2024 national budget is allocated 2.7 trillion Zimbabwe dollars, or 5% of projected revenue, under the intergovernmental fiscal transfers to provinces to undertake local projects that improve provision of public services that reflect the needs of the communities in different regions and localities. Let me turn to the Ministry of Local Government. Local authorities play a pivotal role in service provision at local level, especially on restoring water supplies, fixing sewage systems, repairing roads, to complement central government and development partner efforts. An amount of 1.2 trillion Zimbabwe dollars has been set aside for the Ministry of Local Government and Public Works to spearhead development within communities. Furthermore, the National Council of Chiefs has been allocated 40 billion Zimbabwe dollars to enhance management and traditional leadership systems. I now turn finally to image building, engagement and re-engagement. Mr. Speaker, sir, government is making progress on engagement and re-engagement under the institutionalized structured dialogue platform to underpin the Zimbabwe's arrears clearance and debt resolution process. The allocation of 976 billion Zimbabwe dollars to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Trade is meant to advance image building, engagement and re-engagement. In addition, 122.4 billion Zimbabwe dollars has been set aside to the Ministry of Information, Publicity and Broadcasting Services in order for them to improve the country's image through robust information management and dissemination. That concludes the allocations in terms of votes that are proposed for the 2024 budget. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to revenue measures. Mr. Speaker, the measures that I'm presenting seek to provide relief to taxpayers, enhance the capacity of government to generate additional revenue, in particular from micro and small enterprises, the mining sector, as well as strengthen tax administration. Let me go straight into the tax relief measures, starting with income tax. Looking at the tax-free threshold, I propose to review the tax-free threshold to 750,000 Zimbabwe dollars per month, or 9 million Zimbabwe dollars per annum, and adjust the tax bands to end at $270 million per annum, above which the tax will be levied at a rate of 40%, and this is with effect from 1 January 2024. On the bonus tax-free threshold, I further propose to review the local currency tax-free bonus threshold from 500,000 Zimbabwe dollars to 7.5 million Zimbabwe dollars with effect from 1 November 2023. I now turn to withholding tax, focusing on small-scale and subsistence farmers. Mr. Speaker, in order to support smallholder and subsistence farmers in the grain to the Grain Marketing Board and other commercial players, I propose to review the tax-exempt threshold on withholding tax on agricultural commodities that include soybeans, sunflower, groundnuts, cottonseed from $1,000 per annum to $5,000 per annum, or this local currency equivalent. Let me turn to the suspension of duty on motor vehicles that are imported by safari and tour operators. In order to allow the tourism sector to fully recuperate, I propose to renew the suspension of duty on new motor vehicles imported by safari and tour operators for a further 2 years, beginning 1 January 2024. Mr. Speaker, so that was a summary of some of the tax relief measures. There is more in the thicker document, statement. Let me turn to revenue enhancing measures, starting with the taxation of micro and small enterprises. There's an urgent issue regarding the licensing of traders, Mr. Speaker said. In order to restore the supply chain from the manufacturer, wholesaler to retailer, I propose that only licensed and tax-compliant operators procure goods from manufacturers and wholesalers. In addition, I therefore propose that only traders registered for VAT purposes and in possession of a valid tax clearance certificate be eligible to procure goods from manufacturers. I now turn to VAT registration thresholds. I further propose to review downwards the VAT registration threshold to $25,000 or its local currency equivalent with effect from 1 January 2024. Enterprises that meet the above threshold should thus register and account for VAT, failure of which applicable penalties will be invoked. I now turn to something new, Mr. Speaker said. It's called the minimum domestic top-up tax, which seeks to foster a fair and effective tax system across the entire world. Mr. Speaker said, The domestic minimum top-up tax, DMTT, is part of the global rules which aim to ensure that global profits of large multinational enterprises are taxed at a minimum corporate income tax rate of 15%. Granting of generous tax incentives results in an effective tax rate of less than 15% for some of the multinationals. Under the global tax rules, where tax incentives results in an effective tax rate of less than 15%, the tax jurisdiction where the multinational is headquartered collects the difference between the effective tax under the tax incentive and the minimum effective tax rate of 15%. This is called the top-up tax. So the DMTT allows the country where the low tax profits arise from the tax incentive to collect the top-up tax rather than ceding tax rights to the headquarter jurisdiction of the multinational. The calculation of the DMTT will be based on the effective tax rate charged on the jurisdictional profits, not the jurisdiction's statutory corporate income tax. The DMTT only taxes the tax incentives to the same extent that the same income will be included in the headquarter country of the company, the multinational. I therefore propose to enact DMTT rules to guard against ceding tax rights to foreign jurisdictions on top-up tax arising from tax incentives that are provided to those investments. I now turn to the issue of surcharge on high-value vehicles. Mr. Speaker, and honorable members, will be aware that government in 2023 introduced a 30% surcharge on motor vehicles with a minimum free on board value of $120,000. This was aimed at enhancing the wealth redistributive function of taxes. There is thus scope to strengthen the concept in view of the volumes of high-value motor vehicles being imported. I therefore propose to expand the scope of the surcharge with effect from 1 January 2024. I think you will have on the screens in a minute, I hope they'll show it, that for vehicles with a value of between 120,000 to 300,000, the surcharge is 30%. From 301,000 to 700,000, it's 40%, and above 700,000, the surcharge is set at 50%. I now turn to mining tax revenue contribution. Let me deal with the capital gains tax and stamp duty first. Mr. Speaker, sir, I propose that all documents and agreements for the transfer or disposal or lease of mineral rights be lodged with the state for review and approval before a transaction is concluded. Often transactions, Mr. Speaker, takes place offshore without our knowledge as a country for millions of dollars, and we're not involved. I therefore, in addition, I propose that no transfer of mining rights shall be approved without payment of capital gains tax and stamp duty or any other tax due on the value of the transaction. Failure to abide by this condition shall render the disposal or lease of mining rights null and void. Let me come to the issue of sharing of revenue with the state on disposal of mineral rights. In view of the recent developments where mining rights are disposed of privately outside the country at sometimes astronomical prices, I propose that revenue derived therefrom be shared equally with the state. Furthermore, in order to enable government to track the movement of mining rights for tax purposes, I propose that a register of mining rights with a record of applications, grants, variations, dealings, assignments, transfers, suspensions, and cancellations of rights be maintained. and accessible to the Zimbabwe Revenue Authority. I also propose that agreements for the transfer or disposal or lease of mining rights be lodged with the state and reviewed and approved before they are implemented. I now turn to mineral beneficiation, looking at lithium. Substantial mineral revenues can be generated from beneficiation of key minerals with a significant resource endowment of platinum, group of metals, the PGMs, gold, lithium, and diamonds. Economic transformation and development can be anchored on beneficiation. Within this context, any lithium value addition process that does not result in the production of lithium carbonate is not regarded as beneficiation, hence is liable to an export tax. Lithium producing companies should submit their beneficiation plans no later than 31 March 2024. Furthermore, no licenses shall be granted to a prospective lithium company without approval of a beneficiation plan. Let me turn to a related issue of corporate social responsibility. As a token of remembrance of the mountains, Mr. Speaker said, that nature offered, local communities should be provided with basic services that include water, healthcare, electricity and sanitation, among others. Development of mines thus present an opportunity to improve conditions within these communities. Hence, I propose to introduce a 1% levy on gross proceeds of lithium, black granite, and other cut and uncut dimensional stones and quarry stones. These resources will go towards supporting such corporate social responsibility. Mr. Speaker, sir, I now turn to the issue of financing road infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, sir, in order to raise resources to finance road infrastructure, I propose to introduce the following measures. Let me start with the strategic reserve levy. I propose to review upwards the strategic reserve levy by 3 cents and 5 cents for diesel and petrol, respectively, with effect from January 1, 2024. On toll fees, Mr. Speaker said, toll fees are currently pegged between $2 to $10 or local currency equivalent, depending on the type of vehicle. I therefore propose an upward review of toll fees on premium roads, that is Harare Bay Bridge and others, with the effect from 1 January 2024. Revenue derived from the increase will be remitted to the Consolidated Revenue Fund for the purpose of maintaining these roads. On passport and central vehicle registry fees, I further propose, Mr. Speaker, say that passport and selected fees charged by central vehicle registry be revised upwards with the effect from 1 January 2024. Additional revenue generated from the above measures will be ring-fenced, as I said earlier, towards road infrastructure development. Mr. Speaker, sir, I now turn to an issue of levy. This is a cancer equipment issue. It's a very important issue, Mr. Speaker, sir. A levy on sugar content on beverages. In response to the growing concerns on the adverse effects of consumption of sugar, in particular contained in beverages, tax on beverages has been implemented in a number of countries, including the SADC region. The consumption of high sugar content beverages is linked to increased risk of non-communicable diseases, NCDs. It is thus necessary to discourage consumption of high sugar content beverages. Hence, I propose to introduce a levy of 2 cents per gram of sugar contained in beverages, excluding water, with effect from 1 January 2024. The funds derived from this levy, Mr. Speaker, will be ring-fenced for therapy and procurement of cancer equipment for diagnosis. Mr. Speaker, I now turn to yet another important matter, that of a wealth tax. Mr. Speaker, the key fundamental of tax policy is to address regressivity of tax that occurs when individuals in a low-income category pay a higher percentage of their income as compared to individuals in higher income brackets. Consequently, the tax incidences fall disproportionately on the low-income groups, resulting in inequality. In order to ensure that every person contributes to the fiscus in line with their levels of income, I propose to introduce a wealth tax levied at a rate of 1% of the market values of residential properties with a minimum value of $100,000. Resources derived from the levy will be ring-fenced towards urban infrastructure development, in particular roads, water, sewage, and community health centers. Principal private residential properties owned by elderly persons above 70 years will, however, be exempt from this tax. I now turn to excise duty, a proposal for the introduction of a digital platform to monitor goods for purposes of collecting excise duty. Mr. Speaker, the growth of illicit trade, in particular in cigarettes, has increased contraband cigarettes produced in legally registered factories under registered brands, thereby decelerating the growth of revenue to the fiscus. A digital platform that provides real-time, traceable, and authentic data on locally produced excisable products would thus be beneficial to the fiscus. Government will thus explore implementation of a digital platform on locally produced goods, particularly cigarettes. In conclusion, Mr. Speaker, the challenge before us is to consolidate economic transformation already underway to ensure that benefits accrue to every Zimbabwean in line with the spirit of leaving no one and no place behind. Change is inevitable, but transformation is a choice. So said Heather Ash Amara. Therefore, while we celebrate the successes recorded so far, there's still a lot of work ahead of us to consciously implement transformational economic policies which have a positive impact on the majority of citizens, especially the poor and the marginalized societies. The desired economic transformation is a responsibility of all stakeholders, especially the government, businesses, labor, and with each playing their critical role. On its part, the government is prepared to fully play its role of providing an enabling environment through ease of doing business reforms, investment in public infrastructure, and provision of effective public institutions. Mr. Speaker, I finally commend the 2024 national budget to this august House in compliance with the law, and it is accompanied by the following documents. Yes, there's the 2024 national budget statement, there's the 2024 infrastructure investment plan, there's the 2024 citizens budget, we have the estimates of expenditure, otherwise known as the Blue Book, we have the gender responsive budget statement, the finance bill, the appropriation bill, the statement of public debt, and the NDS1 midterm review. I thank you. Dinotenda, Nyabonga, Twalumbwa.
May
Honorable Minister table the presentation at the clerk's table. Thank you, Honorable Minister. Honorable members, if we can all rise for His Excellency to lead. Please be seated. Please be seated. Please be seated. Notice of motion number 1, the Honorable Minister of Finance and Investment Promotion. Thank you, Clerk. The Honorable Minister, having tabled the budget before us, the question before the House is a motion by the Honorable Minister of Finance and Investment Promotion that leave be granted to bring in a bill to make further provision for the revenues and public funds of Zimbabwe and to make provision for ancillary and incidental matters. Is there any debate? I recognize the Honorable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, sir, I move that debate is adjourned to the 5th of December, which is a Tuesday, in this August House. I thank you.
Thank you. It has been moved that the debate be now adjourned. Is there any debate? I put the question that the debate be now adjourned. Those who are of that opinion will say aye. Those of the contrary opinion will say no. I think the ayes have it. I think the ayes have it. The question is accordingly affirmed, and the debate is adjourned to the 5th of December 2023. Notice of motion number 2.
Mr. Speaker.
Yes, sorry.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker. If you may indulge me. I move that the House do now adjourn.
It has been moved that the House do now adjourn. Is there any debate? I put the question that the House do now adjourn. Those of that opinion will say aye. Those of the contrary opinion will say no. I think the ayes have it. I think the ayes have it. Order. The question is accordingly affirmed and the House is adjourned. To what day, Honorable Minister?
To the 12th of December, Mr. Speaker, sir. For cinema budget consultations.